If you see Georgia's offensive line really getting some movement in there, creating space for the running backs, keeping Carson clean, then I'm going to feel pretty good about that as a Dogs fan.
One of the greatest rivalries in college football is at hand. Auburn versus Georgia, the Deep South's oldest rivalry. It's one of my favorite times of year when the Bulldogs and the Tigers get together to battle it out, whether it's at Sanford Stadium or at Jordan-Hare Stadium. This time, the Tigers play host to the reigning champ, Georgia Bulldogs. Of course, I can always offer my insights and opinions about how I think the game is going to go. But in this series, we'd like to go to the other sideline and get their perspective. So today, I am pleased to welcome Randy from A Damn Beast Media here as a Georgia insider, I guess I would call you, or a media personality, however you'd like to define yourself, but a very well-informed person within the Georgia media space. Randy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kyle, thanks so much for having me, man. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It's been a great time this past week getting to know you. I had the opportunity by your invitation to join you on your show and very much enjoyed sharing my insights, however right or wrong they may be, on this game and this rivalry on your show. And we just wanted to return the favor and introduce you to our audience to let them get a good perspective from the other sideline. So let's open it up right there. I want you to just give me your thoughts about the Deep South's oldest rivalry, just in general. What do you think about it? Is there a lot of hate for you between Georgia and Auburn, or is it just this fun thing that happens every year that we always look forward to?
Well, I'm not going to go so far as to call it hate because that's a strong word, but I will say and fully embrace that we don't care for Auburn. And, it's like that funny little song goes, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but we don't care for Auburn. And there's a good reason for that, because as I was growing up and when I was in Athens as a student, it just really felt like, accurate or not, it just felt like the two schools were sort of a weird funhouse mirror of each other. They're really similar. The fan base is really interconnected. They're really intermingled. And it just, that made it a little bit more personal. Now, as we went to the games, we've always had a good time going, even when it didn't go our way. I've had my heart broken several times. But when I think back on the rivalry itself, I mean, obviously there's the classic games, right? Sugar falling from the sky and the 1986 Between the Hoses game. And there are things like that. But then there's the 1996 overtime game. The first overtime game in the history of the conference was between these two squads. So time and time again, this game has put itself in the history books inside the SEC, and more often than not had a great weight and bearing on how the conference was going to shake out in the end. So I love it. I hate it when we lose. And, I don't care for Auburn, but I do respect them.
And I think that's a great perspective of how to operate this. And I think a good model for that would be, Pat Dye and Vince Dooley, both very much interconnected with both schools in different, roles and different facets. But they had a mutual despise on game day for each other. But at the core of it all was a little bit of respect. And I think sometimes we get a little bit wrapped up in the rivalry and the quote unquote hatred of it all, for at least for some fans. But for me, growing up, Georgia was always that rival I tend to look forward to seeing, just because it always was fun. Like you talked about, all that history.
I do hate that it isn't later in the year the way we grew up with it. So I don't know if that's ever going to be able to be something that we can correct and get it back at the end of the year where I feel it deserves to be. But I'm just happy that we're going to hopefully get to play it every year, because when you have this much history, you should not throw it out the window.
Absolutely. So hopefully we keep this where it belongs in, regular, constant, happening every year. I don't think that's any danger, but with SEC schedules and conference realignment, you just never know. It is the Deep South's oldest rivalry, and it deserves to be held in such high regard amongst SEC, but also all of college football. But let's dive into this game a little bit. That's what we're really here to talk about. We want to know what we need to do to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, there's no coaches here gonna, get the insights from you, but we really, as an audience, as a traditional Auburn audience, want to know from someone who's been watching the Bulldogs what to be looking for, what to anticipate, So I know there's only so many games into the season thus far, but let's start with offense. If you had to kind of put I guess a cliff notes on what you've seen, what works, what doesn't work from Georgia's offense, what would you say?
I would say that this is an offense that is good, is growing and evolving, is getting better every week, and ultimately could be really, really, really lethal. I don't necessarily come down. I'm not among those loud voices that you hear that are constantly complaining about what Georgia's doing on offense, or at least it feels that way if you're in the Georgia ecosystem, because the numbers just don't bear that out. This offense has been productive. It has really been on a record-setting pace, and every week it's been one thing or another. Small execution details, pieces in and out of the lineup, right, due to injury or other things. And once those things start to fall in line more consistently, as we've started to see on the field, once we get those pieces back, then this offense could really take off. Now, to that point, I mean, let's just run through some quick numbers here. Scoring touchdowns on offense, Georgia is scoring on like 50% of their offensive possessions this year. They're scoring touchdowns, not field goals, touchdowns. They're averaging 41.5 points a game. That is a new record. If that number holds, that's the best offense Georgia's ever had, breaking the record from Mike Bobo's last time here in Athens in 2014. So they're getting it done. Carson Beck currently on pace to set a new record for Georgia quarterbacks as far as passing yardage is concerned. I mean, he just had a career best 338 against UAB. The offense as a whole, 10 of 13 on third down last weekend. So they're efficient, right? And when they get into the red zone, they were 6 for 6 last week after stubbing their toe the week before against South Carolina. So when I look at it, I see them dissecting what's wrong, addressing the problem in practice, putting it to work on the field on Saturdays, and they are improving. And again, once they get these pieces back, get that gel sort of, rolling and feeling good with one another, I think they're going to be really good. I think that the opportunity is there for this to be a record-setting offense at the end of the day for the University of Georgia.
And I think that's the assessment that most outside looking in, especially Auburn fans, would say is we don't see, at least when you don't look at the numbers, that lethal of a Georgia offense at this moment. But the issue is what happens when it all comes together and gets rolling, as you pointedly addressed. And the big thing about this is you've got some great individuals as athletes that can make a difference on the team. You've already brought up Carson Beck. We always pay attention to quarterbacks. There's, tight end Rock Bowers. That it's just going to be a nightmare.
There's no doubt. There's no shortage of weapons. I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but I think last week they completed balls to 14 or 16 different players. They're spreading the ball around. Lovett and Rara Thomas, both of the transfers, have really come in and made an impact. We all know about Brock Bowers. Oscar Delp is another weapon at tight end. My guy, Rosemy Jack Saint, he is among the leading receivers on the team, and every time he's touched the ball this year, he has made an impact. When you start to get back guys like Ladd McConkey or Kendall Milton in the backfield, and these things start to really roll, I think this team, could really do some good things. But again, I think I heard a stat this week that there are 5 preseason All-SEC first teamers that Georgia has been playing without, at least for part of the season. That makes an impact. I don't care who you are, right? So as these guys come back, I think we're going to see that ball continue to roll. And injuries are a thing. It's never an excuse, but it does have an impact. And as I look at the reports from this week, there are guys like Ladd McConkey, Javon Bullard, Michael Williams, Kendall Milton, Lawson Lucky. They're all practicing. Does that mean they're going to play against your Tigers? I don't know. But if they do, that's good for the Dogs.
It's one of those things where I never wish any ill will on someone, but if, who's just a little bit of a limp, to just kind of kept things just a little bit not so right. Like he's completely fine, but it's just, there's a step lost, there's a notch on that speed dial that's a little bit down. That's okay. That's fine. Just take that extra week, to to heal up. Obviously we're no stranger to injuries as well right now. And I would say similarly, There are some players coming back this week that seems like they're a little bit more healthy, practicing a little bit better. So hopefully what we're going to see here is two teams that are getting healthy and finding themselves a little bit that are going to match up in a great one for maybe the ages. Maybe that's a little bit of hyperbole right now, but we won't know until we actually play the game.
All right.
But let's talk about defense now. And I think this is where you're probably most proud and think the strength of this Georgia team is right now. I might be reading into that too much, but what are your thoughts on defense?
Well, I'm long on record this year saying that at the end of the day, by the time we get to the end of the season, I believe this defense has the possibility to be better statistically than last year's defense. I'm not saying they're going to rival the 21 group, but better than last year's defense, at least statistically. I mean, currently they're averaging giving up like 11 points a game. And that number, I would have to say, is inflated in some areas, because I looked up at a game that was on replay here just today, and I saw on the field at the same time, freshmen, right? And they're out there gaining valuable minutes and experience. That is going to pay dividends later down the road. It's getting them reps now, building that depth. And so I like our starters, clearly, especially if Michael Williams can return from his sickness this weekend to get a little pressure, without having to manufacture it so much. The secondary, the safeties might be the best in the country. One of the corners is right there in that same class. We all know about both the linebackers, Smile Munden and Jamon Dumas-Johnson. They're both preseason, awards list members, various lists. And then if you look along the front, nobody's ran the ball on Georgia in 4 years. And I don't think that trend is going to change anytime soon. So, yeah, I'm proud of that defense. They can tighten things up, admittedly, and they'll tell you as much. But I do like what they're doing. I like where they are, and I like where we're going, especially when it comes to that depth that we've seen built here through the first 4 games of the season.
And that's the impressive thing that Georgia's done, not just through this season, but under Kirby Smart, is build a great foundation and a great depth chart, obviously on defense, but usually as a whole. And you have great players to fall back on, even when injuries do happen here. So when I heard you talk about that, I don't hear really a link in the armor that's a little bit weak. So if you had to kind of fine tooth comb, pick an area, linebacker, defensive back, pass rush, where is the area that Georgia might be the weakest if you had to pick one?
Speaking defensively, I think the obvious thing to say here is that if we just have 3 down, 4 down linemen, we're big on creating havoc and disrupting the quarterback, not so much on sacks. So if you look at the statistics, they're going to say Georgia has a low pressure rate. That's factually true, but it doesn't indicate what we're doing necessarily. So I would say that if you're going to point to something, it would be that Georgia has to generate pass rush, whether it's through bringing somebody from the edge or, one of the inside backers or something like that. With that said, I don't see it as a glaring weakness, but I would say that if you're going to point to something, that would probably be it. And then when you look at the cornerback position, you have Kamari Lassiter on one side. I've already mentioned if Bullard's healthy, you have the best pair of safeties in the country. Well, the other guy on the other corner has been Dalen Everett, and he's been picked on a little bit. That's not so much because he's a weak link. It's just that he's not Kamari Lassiter, who started every game last year for a national championship team opposite Keely Ringo. And even opposite Keely, sometimes they went after Keely. So, maybe Everett at corner, maybe the pass rush, but it's a solid unit.
That doesn't encourage me much because what I was hoping to hear was the pass rush was going to be a little bit weaker than you said it was going to be, because that's what really wreaked havoc with Auburn last week, and the offensive line really struggling to hold Texas A&M's pass rush at bay, which is formidable. It's not just that Auburn was that weak. It was a very formidable pass rush. So that will be interesting to see that particular matchup, Auburn's offensive line versus the Georgia pass rush, and how that kind of works itself out throughout the course of the game. Obviously going to be a little bit more challenging on the road for the Georgia Bulldogs, and magic does tend to happen in the rivalry in general, but obviously in Jordan Hare from time to time. In conclusion of our discussion, well, I guess let me ask real quick, any special teams thoughts or just players that we should keep an eye out, whether it's a kicker or a very fast guy on returns?
I actually think there's a lot to talk about here because operationally speaking, Georgia has been pretty good. In the punt game, the kickoff game, they've been really good. But what I would say is that they do have a freshman who's been taking the kicks for us predominantly this season. He's had a bit of a hiccup. He's going to be on the road, this environment, right? I think it's going to be warm weather, so I don't think weather's going to be a factor, but everybody's going to be watching how Georgia executes extra points and field goal attempts. So don't be surprised if we're in that middle range, if you might see the Dogs go for it, as opposed to put him out there to kick a 45, 50-yarder, right? So he's got the leg. Does he have the, everything else put together right now to make that kick? And then on the other side, Mekhi Muse has been a pleasant surprise for Georgia fans. He's a diminutive kind of guy, but he has a huge heart and a big game. He's really fast. You might see him line up at wide receiver also. He's a gamer. He was a walk-on guy who went out there and just busted his tail, worked his way on the field, and is making plays for Georgia. He already has a punt return this year, so 4 touchdowns. So that's a name that you might want to look out for. But it's one of those things. Georgia hasn't really gone after opposing kickers yet this year. So you never know. In a big game like this, we might see that. But it's one of those things where Georgia's pretty solid, So the kicker is the one thing that I might have a little heart palpitation about.
Well, we always have to have areas of weakness, even if they don't seem that weak for us. And Georgia is definitely one of those teams right now in programs where you really have to search hard to find those weaknesses. But what I hear is, this team for Georgia is pretty solid across the board, given the fact that there are still areas that need to be shored up, that need to be improved. Right. And it's going to be a humongous test for the Tigers in Jordan-Hare. Regardless of whether the way this thing shakes out, I think it's going to be a really fun matchup. So in conclusion, you are more than welcome to give a score prediction, not required. If it's just a keys to the game type of situation, just give me a perspective to wrap up how you think this game might shake out.
I will say this to you. I look at the lines of scrimmage in this game like most conference games inside the SEC, and I would say early in the game, if you see Georgia's offensive line really getting some movement in there, creating space for the running backs, keeping Carson clean, then I'm going to feel pretty good about that as a Dogs fan, because as we get into the second half, I've seen what we can do as far as really starting to lean on people and move the football there. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. I would also say, if I were going to make a prediction, and I will, I usually don't, but I've thought about it a little bit, and I think I am going to make a prediction and say that the Dogs are going to come away with the victory. I'm going to go with 35-10. So I do think that they would cover, but I think that's going to be a result of just what we were talking about. An overall team effort, right? Complementary football. Maybe Georgia gets a turnover that gives them that last touchdown to get the 35 or something like that. I'm not expecting Georgia to run away with it, but I do think that they're going to make it a good trip to the Plains.
There you have it, folks. Perspectives on offense, on defense, special teams, players across the board to keep an eye on when the Tigers take the field against the Dogs in Jordan-Hare. Hopefully we'll be talking about a great game, and no matter the outcome, obviously our history is very well connected and will continue to be so. Randy, thank you so much for joining us. As you exit, if you'd like to plug anything, please do.
Oh, yeah. Just check us out on YouTube. We're having a good time over there, growing rapidly. So come on over, join the party. You can find us virtually everywhere at A Damn Beast. The only one that's different is IG. For some reason, I have to put media on the end of it. But everything else is at A Damn Beast. Come see us. We have a good time over on YouTube and everywhere else. I like to laugh. So, we keep it about the Dogs, but it's good fun.
And that's why I like people like you. Is obviously about the main thing, the main focus, but obviously having a good time is the main thing. So whether you are not whether you're an Auburn fan or a Dog fan, or you're just an SEC fan tuning in, make sure you check them out. And we would love, obviously, for you to come check us out here more at E2C Network. Randy, again, thank you. Good luck, and War Eagle.
Go Dogs.